Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. So I have the round 6 game for you between Wesley and David Gavrilescu. So it's a really interesting game. It's kind of roller coastery. David plays really good in this game, man. I'm not gonna spoil the result, but yeah, it's a nice game. You can breathe a sigh of relief after the game type deal. Yeah, so like I said, this is round 6. All of my people that are coming from the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you, kamusta na, aking makaibigan. Magandang umaga. It is 1:39 a.m., so I think everybody pretty much is asleep. So when you wake up, watch my video. Salamat. I appreciate you guys very much. Anybody who is coming from Romania, I have, I think it's, yes, Bună dimineața and mulțumesc. Hello and thank you for coming by and taking a look at my video real quick. Yeah, so if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look, see what we have for this game. Bam. So we got C4. So we start off with the English opening. We got E6. Knight comes to F3. We got D5. E3. Knight to F6. So as you guys, I'm sure can tell, even though this does start off as a English, it can transpose into, just kind of like a modern, Queen's Gambit Decline type situation. This is very typical Queen's Gambit Decline looking stuff. But we do have Knight coming to C3. We got C5. So we have what is called the English opening, the Agincourt defense. But it does change or transpose into something else. After pawn takes D5, we see bishop to B5, knight to C6, and then we do have a D4. And this is saying the Tarrasch defense, 2 knights. Which is kind of weird because we got 4 knights on the board, but, it's kind of like a hybrid between the 2 of them. So we do see pawn takes D4. 1 second. Okay. I'm sliding. Take my socks. I'm sliding. Okay. Firm. All right. Pawn takes D4. We do see bishop to E7. Now, it is possible in this position after pawn takes D4 to go knight takes D4. Just to kind of show you guys a line. Knight takes D4, bishop to D7, castles, bishop to D6, E4. Knight takes E4, knight takes C6, bishop takes C6, and then queen takes D5. And this is very interesting looking. We do have a lot of pressure here. The king is a little bit open. But, that was just an alternate way we can play. But like I said, we had pawn takes D4, bishop to E7. We got castles by white, castles by black. We got knight to E5. Just putting a lot of pressure on this knight. I mean, of course, you're going to defend it. So we have bishop to D7. We see rook to E1. We got H6, a bishop comes to F4, and then we see the novelty of the game, which is rook to E8. Rook to E8 is a very logical move because, I mean, this is a completely open file. So, I mean, you're pretty much like, hey, man, I'm going to go ahead and take over the open file, which makes a lot of sense. We do see A3. We have rook over to C8. We see H3. We got A6, bishop takes C6, bishop takes C6. Up to this point, both players have played really well. As you can see, pretty much both players have done what they needed to do out of the opening, which is what, Gavrilescu said he was trying to do. Because, it is intimidating going up against Wesley because, I mean, he's one of the best players in the world, man. So, I'd be a little bit scared myself, man. Hey, man. Anyways, so we do see rook up to E3. And this is a really nicely timed rook lift because, I mean, hey, man, rook to E3, rook to G3. You are putting a lot of pressure on this king. This H6 move might come back to haunt Gavrilescu a little bit. So we do see bishop to D6. We got rook over to G3. Like I said, Wesley has some pressure, man. I mean, he has some pressure on this G7 pawn. This F7 pawn can be a little bit weak. Once this queen kind of moves somewhere, we might see something rolling. So we do see king to F8, just sidestepping all the tactics right there. We see queen up to D3. And this actually gives black the opportunity to kind of start to push back on white just a little bit. Queen comes to D3. We see knight to E4. And then after knight takes E4, pawn takes E4, now the queen is getting displaced. So, you kind of move the queen up here, but now you are going to have to move it. So it's not the most convenient situation. And black has actually kind of started to get a little bit rolling. So the queen comes to E2. And then a really nice find by Gavrilescu is queen to F6. Just attacking, simply attacking this undefended bishop. So, I mean, you know, Wesley So is starting to kind of get pushed back a little bit. And that's definitely not something that you want to see, especially a GM playing against an IM. You definitely want to be, you know, have the upper hand, and you definitely don't want to lose. So the bishop comes back to D2. We see queen down to F5. We see rook up to G4. We got bishop to B5. So this is displacing the queen again. So, you know, you have situations in some of these games that I've been showing you guys where, you know, your queen placement is like really, really important. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you're just getting kicked around with your queen. So, you know, part of understanding and playing a legitimate opening is trying to make sure that when you do place your queen somewhere, it's attacking and you are not going to be subject to tempi gains. So you got to be careful. So the queen comes up to E3. And then we have a really interesting looking move, but it is like by far one of the best moves in a position. And it is actually at G5. You know, it kind of looks like it weakened you a little bit, but the king is stepped over to F8. So, you know, you don't really have a lot of tactics that are going on here. And I mean, you know, this rook is a little bit trappy. It doesn't really have a lot of places that it can go. And there is a lot of pressure on this E5 knight. So the queen slides over to G3. And yes, I already said that. Okay, we actually have reached a position where Gavrilescu actually has a very, very winning position. And there is one move. I mean, there are a couple moves you can play in the position that are really great. But there is one move that is just like overwhelmingly like the greatest move in this position. If you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to find that move, go ahead and do so. Okay, so I really honestly feel like, okay, it's a little bit complicated in the position. So I think this move might not be like the absolute easiest to find because, you know, you kind of usually make this move when there are a little bit less pieces on the board and when it doesn't seem like there's kind of a lot of chaos going on. But I think that a majority of you guys will notice that you do have a really, really nice square here on C2. And I mean, you know, what better move to make than to put this rook on the 7th rank? And so the move is a rook to C2. So like I said, I think a lot of you guys got that. Some of you guys might have been distracted by the fact that the position looks really complicated and rook to C2 doesn't really seem to fit at the moment. But you are placing a really nice attack on this bishop and this pawn as well. And this rook definitely has the ability to swing over here. And you just completely take over this file. And there really isn't a lot going on with this queen and rook set up over here. And I mean, there aren't a lot of moves that you can make in the position that really do a lot. I mean, the computer is actually suggesting bishop takes G5, which, I mean, does seem kind of strange. But like I said, that is the computer's absolute top suggestion in the position. So like I said, if you guessed that move, congratulations. A pick on the 7th definitely does come into play legitimately here. But we do see bishop takes E5 in this position. Definitely not a bad move, but it does actually give black a little bit of a chance to start to breathe. And so you'll see Wesley So start to kind of unravel himself a little bit you know, just, you know, kind of breathe sighs of relief. Pawn takes E5, queen takes E5, and then we have queen over to B3. And now you can see that, you know, the rook is going to be able to like kind of come out, or, you know, like it's not as trapped as it was a minute ago. And this queen has, you know, found better areas to be in. And now this B2 pawn is definitely, you know, protected. So I think Gavrilescu, you know, once he took a look at this game afterward, he's kind of kicking himself that he didn't find rook to C2 because it just kind of seemed like it was screaming to be played. But I mean, you know, there'll be other days. So we see rook C to D8. We see bishop up to C3. So like I said, I mean, you see the position now. You know, white has really unraveled themselves, and they definitely have a lot better position than they did before. The queen comes up to E6. We see queen to B4 with check. The king sidesteps over to G8. But, I mean, this rook by itself is not going to checkmate you. You know, you do kind of have to be careful because you do have a little bit going on. But, you know, king to G8 is a pretty safe move. The rook comes down to G3. We see queen down to C4, trying to trade pieces. You know, you are up a pawn as black. So being able to trade down might benefit you slightly. We do see queen to a5. Wesley So does not want to trade. The rook comes down to d6. We see a4, kicking the bishop. Bishop comes back to d7. We got h4. You know, trying to drum up a little bit of something over here. We do see b6. The queen comes down to b4. Now you have to trade. Queen takes b4. Bishop takes b4. The rook comes down to d3. We see rook taking d3. Pawn taking d3. Pawn taking g5. Pawn taking g5. And you guys can see that, you know, black's advantage has gone away quite a bit. You have an extra pawn as black, but you are getting into a rook and bishop in game. Most notably, the bishops of opposite color are coming up. So the rook comes to d1. Bishop comes to f5, holding on to that pawn. We got a5, b5. We got f3, f6. Bishop comes down to d2. We see rook to e2. The bishop comes back to c3. So as you can see, this is a really nice setup for this bishop and this pawn. We got king to f7. I'm running through these moves kind of quick. Neither side really has any tactics or any type of advantage. The rook comes up to d2. Rook comes to e6. We got king to f2. The rook comes over to c6. King comes to e3. We see rook down to c4, just trying to make sure that this king doesn't make any more forward motion. So like I said before, I've said this many times, use your rook to try to cut kings off, because if the king can get into certain positions, it can become very powerful. So the rook comes down to d1. We got b4. Bishop comes down to d2. We see king to e6. We got g4. Bishop comes back to g6. We got b3. Rook comes back to c5. Bishop takes b4. We got rook to b5. The bishop comes back down to d2. We see rook taking b3. We got rook over to c1. We see king up to d7. We see bishop to c3. We got f5. Pawn takes f5. Bishop takes f5. We see bishop down to d2. We got g4. King comes to f4. The bishop comes back to e6. Pawn takes g4. A rook comes down to b2. We see king down to e3. Bishop takes g4. King takes d3. And as you can see, everything has pretty much been hoovered off the board. You have these rook pawns here, which, rook pawns can be very drawish. We do see rook up to b3, rook to c3. Rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, and I will just kind of flow through these moves. As you guys can see, we have two rook pawns, and we have bishops of opposite color. So I think you guys know where this is going. We see king over to c6. We see bishop down to d2. Bishop to f5 with check. King comes to d4. Bishop goes back down to g4. Bishop comes to c3. We see bishop to e6. Bishop comes to d2. We see bishop to g4. Bishop to c3. Bishop comes to e6. And it is in this position that the players have drawn the game. So, like I said, backing up to what we had before, after the queen came to g3, and I think it would have been pretty crazy, if Gavrilescu found this move, because, like I said, it gives bishop takes g5 as the main move to try to make. But if you make any type of moves that try to defend the bishop and protect, you can't really make any moves that protect this pawn. You can make bishop to c3, but as you see bishop coming to c3, f6 is going to be kicking this knight, and you can see this knight doesn't really have anywhere to go. So all 8 squares are literally covered. So that is the issue that you have. You just have too many things attacked in this position. Even queen moving to e3, bishop to e3. These are just going to be dropping the b2 pawn. You are going to just be up a pawn, which isn't completely decisive. But, like I said, you do have a lot of pressure on this knight. And you do have the ability to win another pawn this way. So, maybe he would have been able to press that, into a win. I'm not sure what his stuff was in the past, but that might have been his first win against a super grandmaster. As you guys notice, he is an international master right now. So he is the only international master in this tournament. It's a pretty big tournament for him to be playing in, because normally it's only GM. But yeah, I appreciate you guys very much. Mulțumesc for anybody coming from Romania. Maraming salamat aking magkaibigan. Makito tayo mamaya, and I will see everybody next time.